All right. 2 minutes past the hour. I'm going to kick us off. I want to make sure I respect everyone's time. For those just joining, quick introduction. My name is Remington, the Customer Account Growth Manager here at Scoop, and we are looking at 6 tips to achieve flawless commercial EV charger installations. We want to make this webinar as engaging as possible. So we're going to be offering some poll questions as we go, just to keep everyone awake and active and ensure that we're getting your input. And we're going to start with a bit of a icebreaker poll. So how many of you who work in the industry or don't and are just joining as a guest drive an electric vehicle? Really interested to see how this is going to plan out. Um, I personally don't. I do drive a gas vehicle, and I'll add that to the question here as well. And we're almost had everyone participate. Okay, so we're gonna end the poll. And the results are 100% do not drive electric vehicles. So no one in the webinar currently drives an electric vehicle. Very interesting. Just for some fun facts there, currently on the road in the US, 10%, or I believe it's about 9.5% of vehicles are currently electric vehicles. In terms of new sales in May 2024, 7.5% of all new sales of vehicles were electric. And that is up from 2% in 2022. So you can see this is just a massive curve. We are seeing that slow takeover of the roads. And I think, even if we're not looking at the data and just looking outside our windows, we do see that happening. But the transition does take time, which is a good thing for us because it gives us a bit of time, of course. Now, going over the agenda of this webinar, I'm going to start with some industry context. We're going to chat about kind of, what's happening? Why is this important? Why are we meeting here today? Then we're going to go straight into these 6 tips. I'm going to give you a preview of all of them, as well as why each of them are important and how they fit together. Then we're going to spend a bulk of our time really going over each of those tips. I'm going to spend a couple minutes on each, really digging in to them. And then lastly, we're going to open up a bit of a demo. Now, all of the tips that we are referring to today are technology agnostic. None of them are specific to Scoop, which is where I work. This is rather just tips on how to achieve them and how technology can help. But I have access to Scoop. So at the end, I want to show a demo of how these can play out practically. And I'm going to use Scoop to show you that. So for context on the industry, I already shared some information. 10%, 9.5% of all cars on the road in the US today are electric vehicles. Sales are rapidly increasing. And that doesn't even include things like plug-in hybrids. Those are full electric. Now, what this means is that the charging market is booming with these cars. And there's an infrastructure boom. There's a lot of incentives from the government in North America and Europe to get the infrastructure out in place ahead of what they're anticipating here being a full takeover of EVs. Now, along with this boom, we all have to recognize that these are very complex installations. There's varying different types of connectors and charging levels. There's different electrical infrastructure that often needs to be upgraded to accommodate these changes. And the technology behind the EV chargers is constantly changing, which means as an installer, you not only have to learn what you're doing today, but you have to keep an eye out for the changing technology. What is the market currently demanding? And this stuff is changing on a monthly and yearly basis. So being able to offer your customer the most modern and quickest and best installation is going to be critical. Lastly, what we're seeing is EV chargers are currently struggling to scale to meet this demand. What used to be a bit of a niche industry is now booming. Running operations in a disjointed way is no longer an option. Having, that 1 or 2 people in the office that really know and carry the whole project, that works when you're working on 1 or 2 projects at a time. But as you're scaling up and trying to work on 10 or 20 projects at a time, it's no longer an option. So all of this is increasing the amount of cost necessary to go in and run these installations. but at the same time, provide a higher opportunity cost. So we're seeing increased complexity, increased demand, increased cost, but that also means there's more money on the table for installers. Now, here's the main point of this webinar, these 6 tips, and I'm going to quickly talk about each one and why they're important, and then we're going to dig in. So tip number 1, establishing clear project phases and workflows. So essential for managing any complex project is to break it out into bite-sized chunks with clear ownership and accountability. This is really going to set the foundation for all other tips that we're going to discuss today. Tip number 2 is to standardize your installation operating procedures for your field team, particularly. These field teams are the bread and butter and really where rubber meets the road. So I'm using a lot of metaphors here. It's where the rubber meets the road for this job. So all of the office work is to support the field team. And so making sure that they have very clear operating procedures is essential to maintain your quality and safety while you scale up. It also mitigates uncertainty and the mistakes that arise from that complexity we talked about, which is all going to help you increase your margin. Anytime you have to go back or anytime you have to spend an extra day on site to fix something that was made, that mistake was made, is cutting into that. Number 3, integrating partners and subcontractors into your workflows. So we work with a lot of customers, and particularly when they're small, their idea is we don't want to deal with any subcontractors or partners. We want to keep everything in-house because it means that we have full control over the process. But as they grow, undoubtedly, every single time they find the need and the value of being able to bring subcontractors in. But when you do that, you need to ensure that they're able to execute the same quality and the same process as your internal teams. So tip number 3 is making sure that you can integrate those partners and subcontractors in while at the same time maintaining that quality. Number 4, effective management of your data, documents, and photos. So properly collecting, storing, and being able to retrieve all of the data and the documents, the photos, the evidence that is generated during your job. And this in turn means that you don't lose hours when you're trying to problem solve or meet your compliance requirements or update a customer. I'm sure we've all sat at a desk at some point trying to find a piece of data, an old document, an old photo, and searching through 5 or 6 different data repositories trying to find it. So proper data management, clear procedures around data management reduce all of that work when the time comes. Tip number 5, setting up timely and effective customer communication. So just as important as a quality installation at the end of the day is making sure that your customers are updated and aware of what's going on. This in turn leads to boosts of growth because you get referrals and positive reviews. And we see this time and time again where customers are coming to us and saying, we're doing everything right. We're putting together the perfect product. We're installing things, hitting all of our benchmarks. We're doing great, but our customers seem to be unhappy. And when we look into it time and time again, that comes down to customer communication. Is the customer up to date? Are they aware of what's going on? Are they aware of when people are going to be on site? How long they're waiting for things? This really, soon, if you can master customer communication, then that quality product flows really nicely and the two join together. Lastly, creating dashboards and being able to make data-backed decisions. So I think we've all also sat at a table trying to make a decision and we feel it in our gut. We know what's happening in our company and we're trying to make a decision, but we can't get the data to put on the table and prove it. And we're kind of feel sometimes that maybe we're just addressing the squeakiest wheel. That one project that went sideways, how do we adjust our processes to deal with it? But we're struggling to take a step back and get a bird's eye view and say, is this an isolated incident or is it a greater pattern? So having the ability to pull upon this data, look at dashboards and report on everything happening in your business is absolutely critical. And it's key to letting you then improve and actually address the problem areas as opposed to kind of always feeling like you're chasing ghosts. So those are the 6 tips at a high level. And we're going to dive straight in to tip number 1, establishing clear project phases and workflows. So I'm going to start us off with another poll. And this one is going to be on a scale of 1 to 5, how often do you find that your projects are delayed due to dropped handoffs between teams? So this could be that someone didn't know that something was completed and ready for them and didn't start their piece of work. This could be that something is handed to you or a team, and that team is sitting there missing information that's necessary. So you kind of lose a day while you're chasing up for what's required there. Anything to do with these dropped handoffs really causing disruptions and slowing things down. Amazing. So what I'm seeing is most people are saying right down the middle on a scale of 1 to 5, number 3, sometimes. It's happening. It's not massively often. There's a couple who are indicating that this is more common, and a couple who are saying never. Like we're completely fine, which is amazing. And when you find that this is not happening, that is really a testament to proper procedures and proper handoffs. So really interesting result there, and not surprised. This is something we're constantly pulled into um, customers to talk about. Is when things move from one team to another is the greatest risk of dropped projects. And this is a little bit of a diagram we've put together to outline what it looks like often when companies are growing, when they're expanding and scaling rapidly is at first, though, when you're starting, you choose 1 or 2 communication methods. You have really clean operating procedures and all internal teams are up to date. But as you grow, as your internal team grows, as you bring in subcontractors, as you bring in partners, people start to use different communication methods. And this is where these gaps can happen. Every single red line there is somewhere that a project can get dropped, where a subcontractor is texting to give an update, where all your internal staff use a messaging system like Slack. So you're getting one piece of communication outside the normal channels, or emails are getting lost and when updates are sent. So this is typically what we walk into. And what we're going to talk about for our best practice is to very clearly outline the bite-sized chunks of a project, the phases. So this is how we see typical EV charger installations go. You start with a site assessment and planning. This includes your site survey, things like your power capacity evaluation. You're going to, at this point, start to be determine the charger type and the overall cost estimations. From there, things are handed over to your design and engineering team for electrical design and civil design. From there, over to permitting. When permitting is complete, as I said, rubber meeting the road, the installation happens, probably the most important part of this whole process. And then lastly, hand it over to commissioning. And we included maintenance on here as point number 6 because we want there to be a very clear delimitation, a very clear phase where you say commissioning is done, our job of the installation is done. And if we choose to take on service and maintenance, we are at the end. But we want to separate that from the actual install. We want to be clearly identify mistakes that happen or issues that arise during the installation versus things that happen after that would be considered service. Now, as you're breaking these out and looking at each of these phases, important things to consider are going to be who leads each of these phases. So there's 2 perspectives here. One is who is accountable for all of our businesses, site assessments and planning? Who is the owner of this process at our company? And then secondly, for individual projects, who are accountable to those? We have multiple site assessors, we have multiple designers. So being able to clearly see who is in charge of each project at any time, as well as taking a step back, who owns the whole process. Between each of these points are those risky handoffs. So as things move from site assessment to planning or design to permitting to install, those are the risk areas. And so you really want to define how those project handoffs are expected to happen. What piece of technology are you using? A paper folder moving from desk to desk? Are you sending consolidated emails, or are you using a project management tool to see this move along? Really define the expectations so there's no confusion. You also want to start thinking about how subcontractors are going to fit into this. So as I said, this is part of the industry, and as you grow, you're going to find a need. So being able to look and say, if at some point we need to add in outsourced design, we have so many jobs coming through the pipeline, things are going so amazingly, but we need help on design. Start thinking here about how do we have subcontractors come into this area? How do we hand off to the subcontractor that may be different than we hand off to internal teams? And how do we retrieve things back from the subcontractor? How do we communicate with them? So start thinking about which of these may require subcontractors and pay special attention there because those are that all increases that risk of the handoff. And lastly, the link between your field and your office teams. There's going to be some field work on the site assessment, and there's going to be some field work on the installation. The rest of these are office-based roles or workflows. So thinking about that communication, what piece of technology are each team using for their job, and how do we make sure they're communicating? How do we make sure they're all looking at the same piece of information? And when you map all this out, it's really vital to involve the whole team. We see time and time again, companies come in and they really look to just start this with management. They go, let's bring a couple people into a boardroom and map this all out. But that's actually the wrong approach. You want to bring the teams into this, into a wider conversation. Force people to have honest conversations, to take feedback. Let them bring the improvements. A lot of the time, the boots on the ground, the people at the desk doing the job day to day are the ones who have some great ideas on how you can improve things. And you want to invite them into the conversation as you're talking about these workflows and these handoffs, because they're the ones living through that day to day and are going to have some great feedback. The benefit of this is it also creates alignment, where now everyone says, I got a say in how this was run. I got a say in the machine that we're building. So I'm going to be more aligned. I'm actually going to put some skin in the game. I'm going to go try to follow these processes as opposed to pushing this down from above. Now, we are going to talk about how you can leverage technology to accomplish this. So being able to do this is really going to be the engine of your growth and scalability. Otherwise, you're just constantly trying to wrangle or herd cats in a certain direction. Using technology really sets this onto a railroad that lets you add as many projects as you want, and they continue to go through all of these phases properly with clear handoffs. So using technology, you want to focus on being able to connect your entire team into one area that everyone can see things and understand what they're accountable for. Give a single point of view. Again, everyone looking at the same information is vital. Something that allows your subcontractors to come in. So be aware of different technologies that maybe have costs for additional users. That can always be a bit scary and incentivizes you to not bring other people into your platform because you say, well, I'm going to be paying an extra charge for the next year just to have someone, a subcontract, to come in for a week. So that really pushes you and puts you in a situation where you're not adding guests into the system. So you want to be thinking about that when you're looking at your systems is which one facilitates us adding in contractors. And lastly, something that's going to help you automate your handoffs and communications. And we'll talk about these a little bit later. So moving on to tip number 2, standardizing your installation operating procedures for your field team. Really digging into the most important part of the business here. Coming into another poll question, let's ask, oh, that's actually the wrong one. So I'm going to end that one. I need to find poll number 2 here. Here we go. Thanks for your patience on that. So how frequently do you find your field team making routine mistakes that then require repeat site visits? So think about the complexity of the job. The things that you kind of think should not happen time and time again. And often what you'll find is like there's one person who's really on the ball, but when we kind of hand that over to other people, if that one person's missing, are they making the same kind of mistakes over and over again? Awesome. So the results are right down the middle again. Everyone really likes the sometimes option because it's true. We got most people on the webinar are saying sometimes this is happening. It's not all the time. It's not every single job, but it's not never. This is a pain point for us, and we're losing time doing repeat visits because of this. So best practice here is to develop very clear checklists. We're going to dig really deep into this one. You really want to map out all of the different tasks and requirements for each phase of your project, but especially installation, right? And what this means is you want to eliminate ambiguity around the installation. You want to eliminate the like on the ground decision making, not full decision making, but interpretation of what needs to be provided, right? So you want clear checklists as you go for what you need from your installers, right? And part of these checklists should be mandatory fields, right? Mandatory fields mean letting them have some autonomy in terms of, well, if something wasn't necessary for this job, I don't have to fill out the checklist for it. But some things are necessary for every single job. We cannot get to commissioning. We cannot close out this without this information. So those are mandatory. We cannot leave the site until those are provided. Conditional questions, and this kind of goes with the equipment type. So being able to play with these checklists that say, if we're installing a Tesla charger, we require this level of information. If we're using a charge point installer, we require this. And these live smart checklists that will be able to adapt based on the project that you're doing. And lastly, a very clear guideline and list of required photos. So not just the work that they're doing, but evidence of it, of the photos. And you're going to end up with this big database of everything that you need so you don't have to do those repeat visits. You're not sending someone out just to go take a photo that was missed the first time. And that means having a very clear list of what is required. So once again, this is somewhere technology can step in really, really nicely. So you want to make sure you're using some sort of checklist that everyone is looking at the same thing and the most up to date. This is where paper checklists can really, start to fall apart because someone is using a checklist they found in the truck from 3 weeks ago without realizing that we've adjusted the process and we need different information. So using technology to make sure it's always the most up-to-date checklist in front of the team. Making sure that automates those conditional rules. You're not having them have to determine, because of the charger type or because of the size or because of the work we're doing, which checklist do I fill out? You have that information and you can use that data to determine what that checklist is for them. Remove that from their plate. Having something that's able to capture and store all the images and all the evidence you need automatically will save a ton of time. And then having that synced seamlessly with your office team so that you're using the same tool and the office team can see this clearly. You're not waiting for the field team to get back. Do that large upload into the system. Have a couple of days to sort all that information out before you're seeing the results. Having a piece of technology that as they're filling out this checklist live, your office team is able to see it is going to be vital. Moving on to tip number 3. Integrating partners and subcontractors into your workflow. So next up, poll question. That was the one that I shot off a little prematurely there. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how often do you find that you're having difficulty overseeing and managing the work done by partners and subcontractors? Awesome. I'll give everyone about 10 more seconds here to get their answers in. So very interesting on this one. What we're seeing is significantly higher as opposed to the other questions where we're hitting a lot of sometimes and a couple, nevers. We're seeing this is more in the always and often categories. So significantly higher amount of you are struggling to manage contractors. Best practice here that we have found is, I kind of hinted at this earlier, making sure that those subcontractors have access to the same tool and an expectation is set that they're following the same operating procedures that the rest of your teams are following. So making sure they have the same checklists that you require. Those checklists are going to be vital when you hand over to the next team, right? When it comes from design or it comes from installation, the next phase of that project is going to be an internal team working. And it's vital that that information is given to them in the same format that they're used to working on with their internal teams. If suddenly it's a different type of format, that really throws everything and you're losing a ton of time and you're going back trying to chase them down saying, hey, on all of our jobs, we require these photos, but you didn't give those to, because they're following their own operating procedures. But if you're inviting them into your jobs, you're needing to outline what you require from them. And this is where that saying, clear is kind of falls into play. Set those expectations early, have clear lists in front of them. Don't really allow that room for mistakes. So then you set clear communication channels. So first of all, you're inviting them into your system. You are setting them up with the same checklist and operating procedures. And now you need to make sure you have clear communication with them. Same thing, set the expectation for how they need to communicate with you. It's very common where you find with, you're working with 3 or 4 different contractors. One of them loves to call and calls every single day for their update. One of them is in your Slack environment. One of them's texting. One of them has their own and is emailing you updates. And this just causes massive confusion to your internal teams who are used to working in the same systems with the same lines of communication and are suddenly getting bombarded from different sides by different teams. So setting clear expectations on how they communicate with you is going to be important. And last of all, making sure that these contractors, these outside individuals, have the information they need to do their job. So not just the checklist and the operating procedures, but all that customer documentation, those design documents, those permits, anything they may need to run their installation or their whatever part of the project they're playing is clearly in front of them. And this gets tricky because you also need to manage their access. When you're inviting them into your tools and you're inviting them into your environment, you need to pay special attention to make sure they only see what's required. These are, at the end of the day, outside individuals coming into your environment, and you have a duty to protect your customers' information. So the way you can leverage technology is look for a piece of technology that is able to clearly outline different views. So in this case, a team view, an internal team member, Steve Lee, this is his view. He can see all of the different projects as we're going and feel comfortable that he has a full oversight of what's happening in the business. And we want to use a piece of technology that when we invite a subcontractor in, it really narrows that down. Their permissions are scaled down and they only see the jobs that they're working on. They're not invited to the wider business. And not only on those jobs, but also all the way down to certain pieces of information. Steve, as an external team member, may have access to revenue, margins, what the customer's being billed. But as a contractor, Mark Smith doesn't need to know that, and you're going to protect that information. So making sure you have a system that's able to clearly show this, have them access it while having walls around them is going to be massively important. Tip number 4, effective management of your data, documents, and photos. So you guessed it, there's going to be another poll here. How often do you find yourself with projects delayed because you're losing track of data? And let's maybe take this a little bit different and say not just projects delayed, but just losing hours. How often are you trying to problem solve or find something in either yourself or a team member? You ask for a document and they're running around. You're kind of waiting. You're seeing them move around the office for an hour or two, trying to find and recover some sort of permit or an old photo from an old project. Okay, similar results to last time, actually. So we're kind of moving up the chain here. We're seeing a couple always, we're seeing quite a few oftens. And to be fair, there's a couple rarely and nevers in here. So some of you are doing a really good job. You seem to have a great system in place to manage all of your data already, which is amazing. But this is an issue for some of you. So moving forward, in terms of best practice, it really is defining a company-wide storage architecture and naming convention. What we often find going into renewable companies is a couple people will have a really good way of managing this. Either your accounting team or designer is on the ball, and it's just the way their brain works is they're sitting there and they've lined up everything perfectly, and you see their files and you see their storage and you go, wow, so like it's just perfect. It's what we need. But then you move over to the next team and you have a complete jumble, right? There, that other team is lost. So company wide, taking a step up and saying, as a company, every team is going to commit to following this architecture. Everyone is trained on it and everyone is accountable to making sure they do it. We recommend folders in the following manner. So whatever your storage system is, starting with the customer name, the physical address for the job that you're doing. So we'll use the example later, Best Buy and like Alamo rental cars. So my customer is Best Buy. My project site is 123 Granville Street. The project name is Underground Parkade. That's what we're working on. And then you get into the phase. So not just the full project. Don't have all teams dumping into the same area, but now under that project, have each team or each phase of that project having their own folder in there. Finally, that's where you're going to put the file. And then best practice is to train your team to use the exact same naming convention on those files. They're going to get pulled and downloaded from the system. They're going to get shared over email. And if you're following the naming convention, then when someone pulls this photo of the installation location and emails it to another team member or emails it somewhere else, and the customer comes back or the team member comes back and asks, do you have a different photo from the same view? Anyone else is able to clearly see where this file is currently living and get back straight immediately to that place to look at the other content there. Whereas if you kind of drop the ball, if you're putting the data in, but you drop the ball on the naming of the file, soon as it leaves that folder, you lose all the value of that as well. So making sure the teams are having this clear SOP, having it documented somewhere, all new team members trained on it and held accountable. Then when you get to the field team and you push this out to your team, you're going to say not only what they have to collect. So not only do we have a checklist of the photos we need from the installers to deliver, but how they need to document it, how they need to be contributing this information into the system and sorting it so that later on, we're not losing time looking for it. Once again, this is somewhere where technology steps in and can automate a lot of this. You want to find a technology that guarantees you can get this done with minimal effort. You want to prevent, installers having to spend an extra 30 seconds on every single photo that they're taking in order to add the naming convention, right? So a system that's able to, based on the photo they're taking, automatically sort that and put it where it needs to go is going to be invaluable and save you all of that time while delivering that outsized reward of highly organized data. So having that digital checklist that they're working through, while at the same time having that checklist file into a storage system is going to be very valuable. Moving on to tip number 5, setting up timely and effective customer communication. So moving into our poll question, 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree that customer communications are consuming a lot of time and aren't always consistent? And I really want to dig into the consistency here because what we often see is customers saying, some of our projects, amazing. Our customers end up being raving fans. They're very happy and they felt really in the know of everything that happened, while other projects don't. And we can't figure out what the difference is here. So not only are you spending a lot of time on it, but you're spending a lot of time in getting inconsistent results. Okay. This is all in, most of you said agree, and a couple of you even said strongly agree. So this seems to be a very big pain point for everyone. I'm glad we included it here. And we're going to talk about some best practices. First and foremost, let's make sure you determine a point of contact for every single project and customer. Right. And this is going to be the main person internally who is in charge of the customer, receiving communication from the customer and sending communication out. That one person who's CC'd on everything to do with the project, right? Project manager is often the person who's going to live this role. This is going to make it clear of how things work, and it's going to avoid those lost emails. It's going to avoid suddenly not knowing something because someone else took a phone call, didn't update the team. Whereas if you're very clear on exactly who the owner is, you'll be set up for success. Then you want to make sure it's clear how they communicate, which channels you communicate with your customer in. And there's a couple important ones. Phone calls are great for urgent work. Emails are great for confirmation. Text messages are great for little heads up and updates to the customer. So as a company, being able to clearly define these, do not leave it up to all of your staff to interpret when to make a phone call versus an email, because everyone has a different personal preference there. But if you're able to clearly define the situations that a phone call is required versus an email, you're on your way to creating a very clear system of communication. And we actually included some reviews here. Really interestingly, we looked up in our local area a couple EV charger installers, and these are actual reviews. We've anonymized them, we've changed the names and the faces, but these are actual reviews, and these are the 5-star reviews, and all of them are pointing out about being updated, about being in the know, about being clearly communicated with. So very interesting. Obviously, a big part of this is a quality product, a EV installer that's charged at, or an EV charger at the end of the day that is installed properly, it's working, and the job was done on time and in budget. But just as important, what you see from these reviews is that the communication to the customer was present. And that's what's going to create raving fans. That's what's going to create this organic growth as people go to the industry and as people talk to each other and say, work with this company because not only did I get a good product, but I was always aware of what was happening on my project. So think about those phases we had earlier, the site assessment, the design, the permitting, and then map that out and start to think about how I'm going to communicate with my customer. How am I going to make sure that they're updated every step of the way, right? People much prefer knowing, hey, this is the current phase and it's going to take a week, than waiting for a week in the dark, not knowing what's going on, right? And if there's a delay, most customers prefer hearing that there's a delay ahead of time. By the way, project's being pushed out. Here's the new timeline, as opposed to we're kind of keeping you in the dark, right? Nobody likes that. So think about that mapping. Think about the situations where you will update the customer, and think about the communication channel. Which of these are going to be done over email? Which of these are going to be done over phone call? And which of these are going to be done through something like a text message? And lastly, standardize them. Build the templates and the documentation. Do not have your team rewriting the emails over and over and over again. It's not a good use of anyone's time, and it leads to inconsistency when it's different team members or someone gets too busy to write the email properly. So once you've looked at those phases and where those updates need to happen, it's very easy to put together the templates the customer needs. All of this, as I mentioned, ends up leaving a great impression where for very little work, your customers are coming back raving fans and leaving you 5-star reviews. So again, I'm going to bring up, this is a perfect area for technology to automate. When you have your projects move through a system, you're not relying on individual people to say, I know that that project just went to permitting and I need to send an email. Have the system that is tracking that project and moving it into the permitting lane, have that system send that email, have that system queue up the phone call or create the task for the phone call, right? That makes a ton of sense. And it means you're not going to drop everything every single time every single project gets to that stage. It's going to update the customer as opposed to relying on individual team members to remember, or every single workflow they have is first thing I have to do is send an email. So build those automations in, write those templates, and line them up with that system to make sure your customers are always updated. Oh, and here's a great example of that. Sorry, missed that slide. So this is an example of how technology can really help. So when you're looking at the installation, when that phase is complete, right, send the email, provide a report to the customer with the photos, assign a task to someone to call the customer and confirm, right? So line up these automations during each phase just to really kick off and make sure they happen every single time without fault. All right, our last tip of the day, tip number 6, creating dashboards and making data-backed decisions. This is also going to be our last poll. So let's take a look on a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agree to strongly disagree. How do you feel most of our business decisions are not based on actual data? The example here, and you'll know this is happening when you feel you're maybe sitting in a boardroom trying to make a decision and you're making it based on a gut feeling. You're like, I know something's happening, but I don't have a dashboard or analytics in front of me to show it. Like I know it. I can tell you we're struggling here, but I don't have something to prove it. Or more likely is you feel like you're kind of always chasing that squeaky wheel. You have something go wrong and you're in the decision-making process to say, how do we fix this? But you're not sure if this is an isolated incident or if this is a wider pattern, right? And you're kind of spending a lot of time trying to say, is this important enough that we address and fix? Or do we walk away because it's an isolated incident? We just need to, take a quick look or prevent something happening again. So This is actually pretty contentious. What I'm seeing here is about half of our audience strongly agree with this, and half of them strongly disagree. So really interesting there. Seems to be both sides, and it probably has to do with if you have a good reporting structure in place. So best practice here is to make sure you have clear KPIs or key performance indicators. So categories that you look at and have this data readily available at all times to help you guide your business. Start by determining which KPIs you want to measure. For EV charger installers, we recommend project execution and bottlenecks, being able to look at the timeline of projects, where things are being held up. Resourcing and forecasting, so you know what is coming down the pipeline and what resourcing you need in place. Revenue and profit margins should be a given in every company. Installation quality. How many service calls are you having to do on jobs that you did? What are those service jobs going back for? Was that a quality issue? Did we make mistakes? Or how often do we have to go into a redesign or a revision? Lastly, process and workflow automation. As you're doing all of this work to build out these phases, to build out these operating procedures for your team, how are they adopting them? Are they actually following them, or are they continuing to kind of go rogue and act as lone wolves? So build dashboards and have an ability to pull all of this data into one place. And once again, this is going to be massively vital when it comes to leveraging technology. Find an analytics tool that is able to take all of your data from across your company into one spot. Most companies, when they're growing, these analytics and these KPIs start by someone managing an Excel spreadsheet. And it's always one or two people in the company. Often they may even have their own separate Excel spreadsheets. All right, we'll get some water here. All right, we're going to keep trying this. I'm going to keep drinking water as I go. If you don't have all your data in one place, and if you're not collecting new pieces of data as you go, it's a much larger task to try to report on this down the road. So every single time your team is doing something, they're generating pieces of data. Every single time an installer is putting in photos, is moving something from one phase to another, is saying that they've completed something. That's all data around timelines, how long it took from start to finish, how long for them to add certain photos, quality of certain things that they did. So being able to leverage all of this data that's used is going to be massively important as you go versus, some things that you decided at the very beginning of your business that were important. And then what you can do is you can take these initial KPIs I talked about, like bottlenecks to duration, how long things are taking, revenue, and you can match it against and leverage it against this wider data set. So if you have a system that's able to do this, what you're able to look at eventually is, let's start looking at revenue by physical address. Let's look at duration and how long projects are taking by who's on site or who the designer was earlier in that project, because all that information is available in one system. If you commit to Excel, suddenly just be able to say, hey, I want to see where my bottlenecks are in installation by who the original designer was. You don't have that information all in one place. So being able to pull this information from other tools and consolidate it all into a single area is vital. And that's, again, going to be the use of good technology. So as we round the corner here, we're done with the 6 key points. And what I'm going to do is we are going to jump over into the Scoop platform. Again, I'll point out all of these tips are data or are platform agnostic. They don't require Scoop in particular. They are just best practice for managing EV charger installations. We talked a lot about how technology is going to help. I'm going to show you specifically in Scoop how we handle that. But all of these can be translated to other systems or multiple other systems. So first thing we talked about was really laying out these different phases, breaking projects into bite-sized chunks. And you can kind of see that we've copied this into our commercial EV installation dashboard. And we have about 10 projects, 3 of them are completed. So I've got 7 active projects, and I can see clearly where each of them are. And as we talked about, it's not just about seeing where they are and having them in a certain phase. It's about ownership. It's about accountability. So I can see under each one exactly who is in charge. For my Home Depot at Olympic Village, Jacob is currently working on the site survey. I've got 2 in design and engineering. They're both in progress. John is in charge of both of these. In permitting, my Home Depot in Strathcona, currently Frida is working on. And I can even see the status. This is permitting application submitted. So I know there's no work. We're waiting. I can see how long it's been here as well. And that's important, right? This is how you're getting these clear handoffs. This is how you're having clear accountability and ownership over workflows. You're able to approach the individual who is currently in charge. You also get really good surface level information you need. Any project manager is able to look at this board and immediately see Home Depot in Strathcona, we're doing 4 EV chargers and those are Tesla. And I can start to pull up, hey, here's our permit. Here's my design document, right? So having this information very clearly available at the click of a single button, there's no digging it as a project manager. You need to go and find it. And our team is held accountable. Next, I can see actually for my installation, this one's ready for review. So I've got one down here, Metrotown for their West Parkade. Well, this one's currently in progress. But the underground parkade at Metrotown, I've just been told there's 10 EV chargers. They're putting in ChargePoint and it's ready for review from the office team. So with a click of a button, I can open this up and see, and this is that tip number 2, a very detailed installation operating process, right? This checklist for installation. It's not just what you require from them. Just as vital is in the same area, in the same tool that they're using, you are letting them know exactly what they need to do their job. So at the top, I've got my site information. I've got the address we're going to. I've got Jimmy Buffett. He's our main contact at Metrotown with his phone number and contact information. So if an installer on site needs to give him a call, they have that. And I've even got some notes here. And these were notes taken during the design process. So, this is going to be one of 3 different parkades that we're upgrading with EV. And mall security has agreed to restrict access to this area during construction. And I've even got an additional phone number here from mall security. So my team on the ground aren't calling the office or messaging the office saying we're having an issue. Who do we talk to? What's mall security? What's their phone number? They have all this information clearly in front of them as they approach this job. We then have our design and site information. So everything that was collected during that site assessment, right, from the initial cost and the initial build is going to be 10 chargers, 10 ChargePoint, to the photos. This is where we're going to be putting in these charges. This is where it's expected to go. And our mapping document, our plan set, right? So my team can easily find these. They likely have physical copies on site, but in case they get, blown away or the guy with them in the truck drives away, my team is able to quickly open up and find the data they need, right? They have this repeatable data in front of them. As part of this installation checklist, we also highly recommend including job safety or job hazard reports. So in this case, every single day that they're on site, and it's been 3 days, they are filling out a job hazard report. They're talking about the PPE that they're wearing. They're talking about the hazards that are present, and we're getting a signature. So they're just coming in and every single day when they show up, filling this out. And that's, helping make sure that they're all hitting the same quality in terms of safety. And lastly, we talked about these photos, this ability to document and clearly sort everything as they go. So instead of having that one dumping folder, instead of having Dropbox or Google Drive where they're just taking 100 photos on site and dropping it in, and instead of relying on specific individuals, this is where we find a lot when we go into companies. They go, we don't need to tell our installers what to do. Our install lead is great at their job. He knows exactly what to do every time and he always gets all the photos, which works until that person takes a vacation or until your business is growing so much that you have a second installation team and that person can't be in 2 areas at once. And that's where the friction happens and this falls apart. So taking that person who is really good at their job and knows exactly what to do every time and documenting it and being able to bottle that up and give that to other teams is vital. And using a system, and this is sorting these for me. So we're saying we need a picture of the final charger location. Well, here we go. Right? We need a picture of the wiring without the faceplate. That's available to me. And this is available for posterity anytime in the future, whether it's months or years down the road. If we get a request saying, where is the photo? Can we see what the faceplate is? Or the wiring without the faceplate? I have this information at my fingertips. The next tip we talked about was clear handoffs and communication. So using a tool that once we're done here and we've taken a look and we say, yeah, installation's complete, we can set this to project closeout. That is going to be a clear handoff. That is going to remove this from Frida, who's currently the install lead. It's going to remove it from her responsibility and hand this over to our commissioning team to do their job. That is a clear handoff. They're getting all of the information that's being generated put onto their lap. And the next thing is we're also leveraging this for that other tip we talked about, which was clear communication to the customer. So we're using this button, which we're handing over things internally, to also trigger automations to the customer. In this case, when I click this button, we're generating a PDF report with the installation, right? And the details of what happened. So who was in charge of it, how it ran, the start date and the end date, all the information. And we can restrict this. I can design this report to hide anything that maybe are internal notes. And we're delivering this to the customer via email. So the customer's fully aware of exactly what happens as they go. And that's a great way. Now my customer's informed every single time, and it didn't take a second to think about it. I just know as I hand this over, my customer is updated. Last but not least, the final point we talked about was clear data to make decisions on. And that means an analytics tool. That means pulling all of that information from, in this case, Scoop, but from whatever system you're using into an analytics tool to help us make smart decisions. And can I get information from other tools? Can I get information from my accounting system around revenue? Can I get something from my CRM around customer communication and how they are responding to our emails? Everything like that is going to be massive. So being able to pull all of this data into a single spot is going to be invaluable. And this is a bit of an example dashboard. So I have my projects by status. This is very similar to that view I had on the other page of them in the lanes, but a bit more of a summary of just where everything is. But as I go, I can see also status by volume, right? So the amount of chargers that we're going to be putting in. I can see right now I have 20 chargers currently in install and 10 in commissioning. And I've got another group of 13 kind of coming down the pipe here. They're currently in design. This helps me resource. This helps me go, do we, ask the questions. Do we have these in the warehouse? Do we have the night staff in place in order to have a job where 13 and potentially a total of 23 are currently pre-installation are going to be coming down and may hit installation at the same time. So this is going to be massively helpful with your forecasting. And so is this one. Who are my leads? Who are this is staffing. The previous one is kind of resources and physical infrastructure. This one is by lead. So I can see that, Jacob is working on one project in site assessment. John is working on 2 in design and engineering, right? But I have Frida here. She's twice in this column, but I can see there's a total of 4 jobs sitting on Frida's lap between permitting and commissioning. And actually, if these 2 pass design and engineering, they're going to hit Frida as a project manager too. And this is the perfect warning for us as a business of, hey, we may need to start looking and resourcing an additional person to help Frida because she may get overwhelmed pretty quickly. Lastly, one of my favorite dashboards that customers get so much value on, that quality assurance. Where are things going wrong? Where are we losing our margin? So in this case, revisions. So the first ones here are about additional information required. 2 projects in the past month got to design and then we required additional information. So they didn't have what was necessary to complete their work. 1 got to installation and 1 got to permitting before they required additional information. So this is all stuff for us to look at and say, how did it get there? What did we miss? Do we need to make these fields mandatory? So every time it goes to design, we always have this data. But this here sticks out like a sore thumb. This was a redesign required at installation. So 3 projects in the past month got all the way to installation before we had to do a redesign. That all chews into our margin. So as a business, you're now able to make a smart decision. You're able to look at this and say, we need to address this area. Let's dig into these 3 projects, pull them up, autopsy them, see who the designer was, what the mistake was, that by the time we got to install, we had to go back and lose, potentially a week and disappoint the customer by pushing out this project because we had to do a redesign. So, couple examples of being able to make decisions based on hard, real data. So that is the end of my demo. Thank thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you for participating in those polls. I'm actually going to very quickly, we'll jump right back up to all 6. Allow me just to scroll through here again. All right, we talked about establishing clear project phases and workflows. Standardizing, specifically installation. If you're going to dig in anywhere and really define anywhere, installation is probably the first place to start. Integrating partners and the ability to integrate partners and subcontractors into that workflow, inviting them into that tool, limiting their view, and that lets them deliver the exact same quality as the rest of your team. Effectively managing your data, documents, and photos. This was something a lot of you struggled with, of kind of chasing around pieces of information that get lost or all get dumped into a single area. Setting up timely communication for customers to get those reviews. You need those 5 stars. Those are going to help you grow your business. People talk. People are going to refer you around if you're able to properly communicate. And lastly, making data-backed decisions by having all of that data in an analytics tool. So thank you all for coming. I hope these tips were helpful. We're really interested to do more of these. If there's any topic that you feel like you'd benefit from a webinar on, would absolutely love to hear from you. If you're a current Scoop customer and you're interested in exploring EV charger installations, please reach out to myself or your customer success manager. We'd absolutely love to help you get this set up and work on these workflows with you. And if you're not a Scoop customer, but through this webinar, you're starting to see the value in some of these areas, on some of these tips of being able to use technology in this area. Again, we'd love to have a conversation with you about that, around how we can streamline those workflows, optimize them, and leverage technology to accomplish that. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for hanging out with me for an hour. I hope this was really helpful for you, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.